Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today. You know, one of the things that we've really appreciated is for years we broadcast from 1 to 3 on a national network. We will continue to do that, but we've added this particular hour from 12 to 1, which is primarily heard by people in the state of Texas. And this has allowed us to do some things that I think are really important. For years, I've been paying attention to some of the problems in the city of Dallas, but it's been difficult to always focus on those, because if you talk about Dallas or you even talk about Texas, people in 41 other states are going, well, I'm only slightly interested unless it happens in my town or in my state or my city. So this hour, when we have a majority of you in the Dallas area listening to this, and I recognize some of the others of you that are listening from other places like Minnesota and elsewhere, I think you'll benefit from this as well, because what is happening in Dallas probably will be happening elsewhere. But we are privileged to have somebody who I've certainly been following afar, individual that has been on a number of radio talk shows with Rick Roberts and people like that. He's done a number of speaking engagements. I've watched some of his YouTube videos. And his name is Nick Novello, and he was born in Bronx, New York, and served in the Navy, and then, of course, has been in the area of law enforcement, has been really 3 decades behind the wheel of a Dallas police patrol car. And that is certainly enough. We could thank him for his service. But he's also really wanted to talk about police reform and really educate us about what might be considered the dire situation of the Dallas police force. So I just think it is great that you could come in the studio today and talk about some of these important issues.
Well, it's a real privilege and a pleasure for me to be here.
And again, thank you for your service. And also, a little bit later, we might even share some of your conversion, because it's a powerful story as well. But let's get into this, because anybody that's been paying attention to this has seen you on television, heard you speak on various issues, and we recognize that we're putting our citizens in danger. Nick, one of the things I sometimes say when we talk about Second Amendment is when seconds count, the police are just minutes away. But in the case of Dallas, sometimes they're an hour away. Talk about that, if you might.
Well, you know, Kerby, a good many things that I've posted to my Facebook account in the interest of the public welfare show that Dallas has become, quite frankly, dysfunctional. When I spoke before the city council in August of 2017, I made a number of statements, and one of which was that in a free and open society, the first requisite is order.
Yes.
And that's my job.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in Dallas, they've undermined that. You know, I want to make a point that's so important regarding the policing function in America. Right now, we have a system based on consent. And that system of consent is based on trust, that we're within constitutional context in how we do our jobs. Well, I submit to you today in America, it began with President Obama, but that trust has been undermined to the point where it's no longer tenable, particularly among black and brown communities. So what I see happening, and I'm not clairvoyant, but I'm still working, we're morphing into a system and moving away from consent. And if we're not careful, we're going to have a policing function based on coercion. And that's where we are moving. We're moving towards a monolith. Initially, when I began to speak, I thought what I was speaking to was specific to Dallas. And then I came to find out that every major city in this country run by liberal progressives have done this to the policing function. There's chaos in cities, but I will be very specific to Dallas. My talking points are principally driven by the fact that if we can't do what's fundamental to the policing function, answer your calls for service, then what is one to make of prostitution, gambling, gang activity, other white-collar crime dynamics? I submit to you they're not being addressed in Dallas right now.
Well, and part of that issue, as you said, is consent. You know, the assumption was, and we would teach our children, and our parents taught us, that if a police officer says, get out of the car, even if you think he's asking you to do something you shouldn't do, you better get out of the car. If they say, keep your hands on the wheel, you keep your hands on the wheel. You know the drill. But when all of a sudden people say, no, I'm not going to do that, and all of a sudden now to even get somebody to do something, you have to coerce them, you have to use physical force, you have the situations we have right now. True?
Oh, this is very true. I will say to you that in Dallas, I would say the policing function in Dallas is, to some degree, shut down. Mm-hmm. Let me make a point, because this is very, very talked about right now, and I'm referring to the Citizens Review Board.
Review Board. I was going to get to that, so I'm glad you brought it up.
I've got to tell you, and I'll say this on the 27th of February before the City Council. You know, the ability of the Dallas Police Department to maintain its integrity and do its job largely rests in its ability to discipline its employees fairly after a due process is done. Well, if we cede that to an external body that knows nothing of what we do and why we do it and has an animus for us, what you're going to see in Dallas is literally the police department shut down. And I don't understand where really and I say this, I know it's true, the fact that we haven't done a good job with that rests with the chief and the command staff. And Kerby, I went to the FBI on a chief.
I know you did.
Yeah, alleging criminal conduct. They interviewed me one time, I'm alluding to public integrity, and quashed the investigation. So where does the lack of transparency rest here? With the higher up, certainly not with the rank and file. So my question is, number one, will a policy like this work if you don't democratize it? You're telling me you're going to watch the rank and file for their conduct violations. How about the chief and the command staff and others? Are they going to be absolved from what's happening? And to touch upon Kevin Felder's situation now, he's a sitting councilman, and he's being investigated for a hit and run.
That's
people
right.
are watching that.
That was in the news, yes.
Yes, sir. So people are watching that. Are we going to democratize accountability or just talk about the police? Because I submit to you, and I say it publicly for public consumption, if we shut down policing in Dallas like we have in New York, San Francisco, L.A., and other major cities, we're going to see the vacuum filled with some form of a monolith, and that monolith will not be consistent with our civil liberties as we know them and practice them.
You know, you mentioned San Francisco. Since I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area, I've been following that. And because the police won't do their job, a lot of these businesses are hiring basically security-type guards, which have not had the kind of training that you and your colleagues have had. And that's a concern as well, isn't it? Well,
Kerby, it's a big concern. I would submit to you that we don't have any reference points for where we are right now in the country. And again, it needs to be said, we're in full rebellion before a holy God. And God's given us the ability to choose. And I had a guy that I was talking to, he got very upset. Well, look at what your God has done. Look around you. And, I couldn't help but, of course, I do it with as much civility and compassion as I can. But I said, let me ask you a question. Would you resent God telling you how to live? And he said, you better believe I would. I said, well, then look around, because you're seeing the fruits
That's exactly right.
of the decisions men have made.
Yes.
But they will be held accountable for these decisions, and that's where we are. Kerby, my narrative today is morphing into calling out the church for her silence. Where are you as we go through cultural, trauma that requires you to speak to your biblical mandate, and they're not?
Well, let's take a break. We've got a lot more to cover, and certainly the responsibility of the church to speak to those issues. And again, many of you will have a chance to watch Nick in front of the City Council and others, and we're going to continue our conversation and a little bit later open up the phones if you'd like to join us. 1-800-351-1212. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Point of View.
your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again in studio with us is Nick Novello, and he'll be with us for the entire hour. So if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Take some phone calls. If you find yourself saying, no, I just want to listen, but I'd like to leave some comments, we have that available to you as well, because we not only broadcast, of course, on pointofview.net, but also on Facebook Live. There's a place where you can leave some comments, and I'll look for those in just a few minutes. But, Nick, one of the things you talked about is this Citizen Review Board. Now, we all recognize that every once in a while you get a bad cop. You know, every barrel sometimes has a bad apple. But if you take the responsibility for disciplining that person away from the people that are in authority over them and give it to someone else who knows nothing about the kinds of issues you're dealing with, you end up with what you've already started seeing in other cities that are so-called blue cities run by liberal progressives, don't you?
Well, you certainly do. And, bottom line is you shut down the policing function. You literally shut it down. If you ask a physician if he wants his work to be evaluated or assessed by a panel of people who know nothing about his profession, it's almost laughable. Same thing with a plumber, a carpenter. So I guess the assumption is that people who know nothing about what we do and why we do it can sit and judge us that way. But, Kerby, I want to make a point. Things happen, well, they don't happen by happenstance. This is all by design. Mm-hmm. The policing function is being undermined across the country. And as we see this, and we see the lawlessness becoming entrenched in various cities, I mean, in major fashion. In Dallas, we have the federal government entrenched in East Dallas, and they boast we're cleaning that up. Well, really, it's more an admittance that we couldn't clean it up. We couldn't do a job. I'm going to say this, and it's going to upset a lot of people, but one of the problems in Dallas is my conversation morphed from particulars to more having to do with financial improprieties. It upset a lot of people. Mm-hmm. One of the things is that, there's a tax on cell phone use, mm-hmm. and that tax, it's a small tax, but it's specific to fund first responders. And I understand in Dallas that tax is used for purposes other than that.
There you go.
So when, the mayor's on record is saying, first responders, well, police are pistol whipping people for their benefits package. Well, my question's always been, Mayor, if we're 1,000 officers short, and I submit to you we're 1,000 officers short, and we're paid 15, 20% less than our area or contiguous cities, well, then where is the money going? We're probably number 1 or 2 in the nation for commercial real estate development. We're awash in money, and yet the mayor tells folks we're broke. There's a real disconnect here, and to highlight the disconnect, as recently as 2 weeks ago, DPD made the public announcement that we have 1,800 officers working patrol in Dallas. Well, I participated in the patrol bid in January, and there's only 1,235 officers participating, many of which there are in non-patrol functions just in that to boast the numbers. So my question is simply this. What happened to 600 officers almost overnight?
Well, and again, you raised another question that we were going to get to, so let's talk about it right now. You're a police officer in Dallas. You can just go up to Plano, Allen, McKinney, wherever, Carrollton, and you can get paid more, and you can see real quickly the problem that you have in terms of having an adequate police force to deal with the kinds of issues that you have to deal with there in the city of Dallas. Fair?
Oh, that's an absolutely fair assessment. People ask me, Nick, why do you speak and what do you want? Well, I speak because I know I have a biblical mandate to speak to the truth. And what I want to see is it's two-pronged. You have to staff adequately, and in order to staff adequately, you need a market-driven wage. Those two things begin to happen, and basically my narrative comes to an end regarding these issues. But when you see the chief at Central send us out to work, and the detail sheet reflects assigned strength for the day 14, and there's 2 of us, 3 of us. In one instance, my partner and I go to the hospital to sit on a prisoner, leaving 0 officers. Kerby, 0 officers available to answer calls, and yet these people act as if my speaking to this is some form of a major violation, alerting the public that they are in danger, alerting my colleagues that we're in danger. And then the city says, well, Nick, this is past your purview. You should not be speaking to this. Well, the oath that I took was taken before God and man. It wasn't taken to protect the department, wasn't taken to protect the badge. We are servants of the people.
Well, and again, talk about that, because if you only have one or two people or one patrol car available to take any call, we get back to the issue of response times. And you've looked at some of those response times, haven't you?
Yes, sir. I've posted a number of things where response times for priority one calls, and the department says, well, let me say this. I mean, Councilman Griggs sent me some data points, and he said, how accurate are these? Yes. I got them from DPD. Mm-hmm. Priority one calls, which are lights and sirens, responded to in 2 minutes. Priority two calls, which are domestics, fights, possibly cuttings and what have you, responded to in 4 minutes. Well, of course, I told him those numbers were plucked out of thin air. So when he insisted on more accurate numbers, they were about 400 to 500% different than the numbers he initially got, which, Kerby, begs one question in my book. How many government documents are being doctored to maintain this false front that we're actually getting the job done, because we're not? One example that should incense people: the young lady that was murdered on Channel 6 in North Dallas. The next day, the paper ran a story. Her body was discovered by the authorities. They left that nebulous. Discovered at 9 p.m. Well, how is that possible if the call sheet reflects we didn't get the call till 9:18? And then, quite frankly, her body was discovered by a co-worker. Firemen violated the general orders to go in and see if they could save her. And then we showed up at about 10:49 p.m. It's unacceptable. This was a life that, for all, I'm going to say it, I don't know that we could have saved her had we responded. But the call sheet in question, Kerby, showed no officers available.
Right. And you've had some, I've watched some of your videos where there was one that was a priority one, and it was a shooting on a highway, if I remember right, a freeway. And it took an hour or something like that?
You know, Kerby, it's interesting you raised that, because I showed that when Mayor Rollins and I had a meeting, and I sat in his office. I showed him that. Mm-hmm. And I said, Mayor, look, a shooting. And then I showed him another call of a man lying on the pavement, robbed, bleeding. No police response because there were no elements available.
None available.
And, you know, the mayor's response to that was almost cavalier. And I understood, again, am I talking to someone who doesn't understand? No. I'm talking to someone who's got an agenda in place. You know, if somebody says, well, sum this up, Nick, sum this up. Well, Kerby, as we morph from one policing paradigm into another, quite frankly, in the mayor's image, what he and the council do not want the citizens to know is that crime is off the charts. We're simply not. We're doing mop-up work. We're not giving you any real-time policing in Dallas. And in certain instances, we do real-time policing when we have the officers available. But for the most part, it's all mop-up work right now.
Yeah, and what you mean by that is that the crime has been committed, the assault has taken place, the robbery has taken place. You show up, take some records, and put them in a file somewhere, put them on a computer somewhere. But you're not preventing the possibility of that taking place in the first place. True?
Very true, sir. You know, I think nationwide you find the patrol function something like this. You spend 60% of your time answering calls. The rest of your time on your beat, you do preventative, type patrolling.
Work the beat.
Talk to people. Yes, sir, work the beat. We're not doing that. Yeah. We're going from call to call to call. And I said this, that back in 2017, that inverse relationship between stress and performance was going to kick in, become a real problem. And so I'm on record as saying that the Amber Geiger shooting, I personally believe that some components in that were stress and fatigue. Mm-hmm. I believe they're going to make that argument. I believe if they depose officers who are presently working, they're going to make that argument and say a very real dynamic in my work environment is stress and fatigue.
You can't think of a more stressful environment. Well, you can only think of one or two other ones. I need to take a break, and when we come back, I'd love to get your comments, and I want to come back and get some comments about stress and what you've had to deal with and what your fellow police officers have had to deal with. But if you'd like to join the conversation today, that number is 1-800-351-1212. We have Nick in studio with us for another half an hour, and if you click on his website, there are all sorts of YouTube videos. So if you've never heard some of this before, you want to see some of the facts and figures and some of the other resources, it is available on the website there, and so we wanted you to have access to that. And if nothing else, I know many of you are prayer people that pray, and you might even pray about, was it February 27th?
27th.
Yes, and so there is an opportunity there to make that a prayer target. But if you'd like to join us, let's take some phone calls too. 1-800-351-1212. Want to come back and talk about the stress on the job. And also, Nick, you'll share a little bit of your testimony. It's a fascinating testimony. I know our listeners would like to hear that as well. So we have a lot more to cover, but we'd love to hear from you. 1-800-351-1212. We'll be right back.
And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Nick Novello in studio, and if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. I might just mention for just a minute that you're available for speaking. I think tonight you're at Highland Park Cafeteria, isn't that correct? And
yes,
at
6:30.
6:30. So if somebody wanted to come out and meet you, shake your hand, I think it's one of the Tea Party events there, but I think you'd be willing to speak in churches or civic groups or things like that as well, wouldn't you?
I speak anywhere because, again, my narrative is not an academic conversation per se. I alert people that Dallas is in trouble.
Yes. And I think that's one of the things that we have to pay attention to, because when you have so many of our politicians saying, oh, it's all fine, it's fine, we don't need any more police force, we're doing fine, our response time is fine, you're just giving us a couple of facts and figures and just a few of many others that illustrate that as well. But before the break, you were talking about stress. I thought it would be good for just a few minutes. Nick, you've been a police officer for all these years. There's a fair amount of stress on police officers, even when you got somebody got your back, even when you don't have the problems that Dallas has. But now it does seem to me that we've taken a stressful job and made it more stressful. Would you agree?
Very much so. I made a point of saying that, when you take the job, you understand that there's the external stress that comes with maybe running into a guy with a gun, someone who wants to take your life, someone robbing someone. So that there's a real element of danger and stress.
Sure.
But, Kerby, I submit to you today, maybe even more so, the stress is internal. A command staff that, and I'm on record as saying the Dallas Police Department command staff has abdicated their responsibility towards us. They're silent. They should be the ones going down to City Hall and saying, we need more manpower. We cannot send these people out in such denuded numbers because we're imperiling them. And so there is that stress that should you make a mistake, you're going to become, you're going to be held accountable when the environment for such mistakes and stress has been made for you by the administration.
And so, again, that's one of the other issues. Why don't we hear other Nick Novello types coming down and making those kinds of comments? Because, like you said, if indeed you're only sending out one patrol car, it would seem pretty obvious that you put that up the chain of command saying, I think we need more than that just to answer the calls that are coming in. And yet we're being assured that everything's just fine.
Well, yeah, this is true. And again, I've gone on Rick Roberts' show twice to rebut official DPD commentary on crime. I released documents that I know has incensed the Dallas Police Department because it absolutely contradicts their official position. And I say that the Dallas Police Department disseminates information for public consumption based on one psychodynamic that people will believe what they prefer to be true. So if they have the department saying, we've got your back, you're safe, they really need to believe that, and so they will. I mean, never mind the actuality that crime is off the charts. And that's where we are. I released a YouTube piece, and I say, listen, if you want a photo op, a slice of pizza, and a cold drink, then come out and meet the chief. Just don't call us when you really need us because we're not coming. We can't come. We don't have anybody here.
Yeah, and again, that's back to response time and manpower and all the rest. Are there ways to solve this? I mean, some people might say, okay, you've obviously pointed to some very significant issues here, but are there some ways to reduce the stress? Are there some ways to increase the number, to reduce the response time to an acceptable number? What are some of the things you've proposed?
One of the things I now propose, Kerby, number one, there's no trust in the command staff. And I'm very careful because I won't give an anecdote where I'm involved because this is the narrative. It transcends who I am. Mm-hmm. I speak because we're talking about the greater good, and I speak because I know I have a biblical mandate.
Right.
So I don't hold anyone responsible and think you should be speaking. I speak, and it's a privilege to speak. I love the Lord. I'm as broken as the next guy, but I know mercy and grace. God has shown me mercy and grace in Jesus. And but I'm always mindful that I can't judge anyone because I'm broken as broken as the next person. But we all as Christians have a biblical mandate to speak truth to power, and in abdicating that mandate, we see things happening around us, and it's not wondering why they're happening. They're happening, and we know why they're happening, but yet for whatever reason, I know a lot of people don't want to disturb their comfort level, or they feel like, well, God didn't really call me to that. Mm-hmm. Well, I submit to you, the scriptures do mandate that you speak truth. Yeah. So it's a privilege for me to be where I am. But again, my conversation is not an academic conversation. I tell the command staff, I tell the city council, this is a matter of life and death. When we have an officer, and God help us that it doesn't happen, we've lost 6 in 30 months. Should we have an officer hurt or killed, and then we can establish it was because there were no numbers available? Some months ago, I went on a citywide assist, and it was to another channel, Channel 5, from the channel I work, Channel 1. Well, really, if you look at that for what it is someone in dire need of assistance, an officer, and we're sending him help from channels that are 10, 12, 15 minutes away. Mm-hmm. And that's the environment we are working in.
That's incredible. And again, back to the chaos that we're dealing with. I mean, you talk about speaking truth and love, but there's another aspect of that, and that is in Romans 1, it says God gave them over, a depraved mind. And we are dealing with a culture already that is moving in the wrong direction. And as a result, I've always said that politics and even what happens on the street is downstream from the culture. If the culture goes bad, it gets worse. And that's kind of what you're dealing with. So if there's ever been a time when we need to have a police force because we can't depend on consent and we can't depend on public virtue, then you really probably need more. And so isn't that interesting? Because if everybody was law-abiding, you could have a very small police force. But at a time when people are not law-abiding, you probably need a larger police force. So the very time when we have more chaos, we have fewer officers. And that if nothing else, you look at it from a Christian point of view, you can see the problem that we have right now.
Oh, this is well said. And I tell people, again, I don't endear myself to anyone when I speak, but we're moving towards a policing monolith in America.
That's true.
I believe shortly we'll probably see martial law. It'll probably start in maybe in Chicago, where there's such a murder rate. Mm-hmm. The homicide rate is absolutely off the charts, and then they're going to show that type of a monolith. People are misoneistic by definition. They resist change, so they're not going to voluntarily say, "Okay, we embrace this." But if you destroy what's in place, a system of consent, and then when it gets really bad, you say, we've got a solution, but it's not going to be very attractive. People will say, well, we want the solution anyway.
That's right. We had a guest on a while back that was just talking about how we're sort of militarizing the police force right now anyway, because as it gets worse out there on the streets, with Antifa or whatever those groups might be, it isn't one of those ones where you pull out a bullhorn and say, you need to disperse, and people say, and they start throwing rocks at you. You have a more militarized police force. And like you said, Chicago may be the first place that shows up where they simply say to bring any kind of control out of this anarchy, out of this chaos, is going to be something where people will give up their freedom, give up their liberty in order to have security. But it's going to be something that's going to look a lot more like a totalitarian regime, a lot more like a SWAT team, and a lot less like your local police force.
Oh, no, this is entirely correct. Kerby, when we have that moment and there is blood spilled, there's no telling. It'll be a collective national cathartic thing. There's no telling how long it'll go before it ceases. And then when it ceases and we look around us, you're entirely right. We'll see a structure absolutely inconsistent with our civil liberties. And once we lose those, I suspect we won't be seeing them again. People tell me, yeah, but you know what? I want to live an unencumbered life. I don't want the government in my business. Yeah. Well, then what you're really saying is you don't want freedom. You want license.
Yeah.
Freedom has context and parameters, and license doesn't. And again, the way I see it, biblically, license is rebellion before a holy God.
Yes.
And it's just telling him, like Nancy Pelosi said, we don't want God in our business. So God will allow you to have your way. But when it comes time to pay and be held accountable. And that's where I think the country's moving, and moving fast and hard. I don't know. I tell people, in my humble estimation, at 65 years of age, I believe I'll see Jesus in my lifetime. This is not sustainable the way we're living.
Well, we're going to take a break and continue our conversation. Nick Novello with us for one more segment, and then we'll let you head on. But again, don't forget, if you'd like to hear him tonight, Highland Park Cafeteria, and you'll be talking to some of the various patriots there. And if you would like to know more about him, you can click on our website, pointofview.net. We have a link. You can watch those videos. It'll take you a long time to watch all the videos we've loaded up there, so you can see some of those and watch them and pass them on to your friends. Matter of fact, I might even suggest that as you're listening to this right now, you might say, I need to pass this on to some other people that maybe did not know all of this. And so there's an opportunity to click on the share button and pass it on. Put it on your Facebook page, put it on your Twitter feed, and you'll get some comments. I'll guarantee it. We'll take a break, come back with more right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Nick Novello in studio with us for a few more minutes. And, you know, one of the individuals we've had on this program many times is Mike Huckabee. He's been a governor, used to listen to this program when he was a seminary student at Southwestern Baptist Seminary, and, of course, a presidential candidate. And he used an illustration a while back that I pick on every once in a while. He said, let me tell you about two different cities or two different towns. One, we'll call it Hucktown. There, hardly anybody gets divorced. Nobody really uses drugs. Kids are really obedient. And guess what? The police force is pretty small. The cost of government is very limited because the culture takes care of itself. He said, now contrast that with your town, with the divorce rate, with all sorts of people using drugs, with the crime rate so high. There, they have to spend an enormous amount of money on the police force. They have to spend money on drug testing. They have to spend money dealing with all the vandalism and all those kinds of things. And I think it's, Nick, kind of the illustration that in a culture where people have biblical values, where you cultivate public virtue, maybe you don't need as much of a police force because people do the right thing. But when we have a culture right now that's just coming apart and chaos, we need to depend on you all the more. But you can only put, even if you could spend all your money, you can only put a police officer on each corner. People are still going to do things. And so this is the problem that I think everybody's facing. Number one, some of these liberal progressive cities are cutting the police force and handcuffing them in a very significant way. And number two, the culture is kind of flying apart. And like you said, when you have this kind of licentiousness and decadence, we need to depend on those of you in law enforcement like never before. And you're not getting the kind of respect that you deserve.
Well, we're certainly not, and I always tell people I'm very mindful of the fact that again, in a free and open society, we do the job based on consent,
right?
And we hope the public trusts us, but you know, Kerby, it's a very difficult conversation to negotiate because I talk to representatives at times of the black and the brown communities, and well, let me quote Terrence Cunningham. In 2016, he was the chief of the International Police Chiefs Association.
Wow.
So he was speaking, and he said, I want to make a comment. We in policing have done some very unspeakable things to the black community because of some very bad laws on the books. And people went, wow. Well, fast forward to today, those laws are, for the most part, still on the books, and we're still doing them. Mm-hmm. So it was a cathartic moment. We need police reform. You know, Kerby, one of the things, I don't know how do you begin to tell a guy who's done 20 years for marijuana possession, and he gets out 20 years later and he finds that there are people in America making millions doing what he went to prison for 20 years.
That's right.
So it's a very fluid situation, but we're not speaking to it. We're using labels. If I ask an officer why certain policies in place are my entire police, if I ask a black or brown person, and I am a minority myself, obviously, but if I ask a minority person, why are you pushing that agenda? Well, then I'm racist. So we're using labels. We're not having conversations. And I submit to you, until we sit down and define the problem, I don't understand how we can even begin to speak to a solution for where we are.
One of the people we've had on this program a couple of times is Heather McDonald, and she coined the phrase the Ferguson effect, in which after Ferguson, there were police officers, and this has now been well documented even by a liberal at Harvard University, who found that actually police officers tend to be more tentative around African Americans for fear that they'll be the next individual that will be pilloried in the press and accused. So at a time when, first of all, we don't have enough police officers, you have some that are afraid to do the kinds of things you used to do in terms of police work. True?
Oh, that's very true. It's what I alluded to earlier about trust. A lot of folks in the African American and Hispanic communities no longer trust us. They don't call us. And when we show up, it just seems that there's a lot of resistance to our being there. And so, again, when these things become very difficult to deal with and we can't deal with them based on that, a program where it's trust, it's consent within the constitutional context, and then we'll see it morph into a monolith, a policing state. I think the military will probably get involved at some point in time. But, see, one of the things I fear for Dallas and this federalization of the department is a possibility.
We forgot to bring that up. Yes, talk about that.
Kirby, should that happen, and should the federal government say, listen, we've got some grant money, we're going to impose our standards, and so we're going to get a lot of people in there right away. People will think, well, wow, that's great. But at what expense? It'll come at the expense of your local sovereignty. The officers working your streets will have a loyalty to Washington, not to you and the community. And so we're going to get away from a local policing the department, or should I say a local sense of obligation to the citizens who pay you and that you work for them. It'll be, I'm a federal employee, so you know what? This is the way it's going to be.
Yes, well, and again, anybody that says, well, that couldn't possibly happen, just look what's already happened in the field of education and a variety of other areas where the federal government's taken over so much. And there are certain things that the federal government should do. Protect the border. Not doing a real good job of that. Of course, we'll get into that later this week. Matter of fact, tomorrow in our weekend edition and national security and things like that. But there are a lot of things that are best handled at the local level. Police, law enforcement, education, property taxes, all those issues, because after all, those are the people that you should be accountable to. So again, this is just another trend that is playing it out. But just before we go, share with us a little bit more about your own testimony, because a lot of people say, what makes Nick tick? They might just be going, this guy is really willing to get out there. But a lot of it has to do, as you said, with your Christian conviction, your belief that you should be speaking the truth in love, right?
Yes. I want to quickly say, I gave Jesus a lot of intellectual assent, just a lot of cheap lip service. I really butchered my life. At 57 years of age, I went home and was very upset. I was still talking about police corruption, but I had a lot of hatred in me. And then the Lord revealed himself to me. He does to a lot of people in different ways. Well, my conversion had 3 months to do with his taking himself from me. And it was a very difficult 3 months. I'm very grateful today because I hearken back to it. And so my life for me, when Jesus says in Luke 9:23 that you pick up your cross, you deny yourself. I know the word deny in Greek literally means you disown yourself. And so I know that Galatians 3:3 says you are dead and hid with Christ in God. In English, that kind of sounds weird. In the Greek, the word dead means you went to the cross with him and you're literally kept in you're part of who he is. But it's all his glory. It's his grace, his mercy, his strength.
Very true.
And so I don't really have, Kerby, people say you don't seem like you have much self-esteem. Well, I don't. Jesus is my self-esteem.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Jesus is my reason for being here, and he's certainly the only reason I speak. I would not be doing this but for him giving me a mandate to speak, and I'm always aware when I speak, I'm as broken as the people I speak about. So I don't judge them, but you have to speak to the fruits of what they're doing, and their fruits are undermining our cultural norms as we morph into more of a Luciferian paradigm.
Incredible. Nick, appreciate you coming in. I've kind of followed you from afar, and I'm glad we now have a context by which we can talk about what's happening in Dallas. February 27th, pay attention. You might even want to go and sit in the gallery and watch him testify, and I would encourage you to pray for him. And it's just great to have you on the program with us today.
Thank you, Kerby. It was a real privilege.
We do have a link to his website. Some of the various YouTube videos are available. There's quite a list of them, and just simply go to pointofview.net. Click on that picture there of Nick, and then it says visit the website, and then they all show up, and you've got all sorts of opportunities. We have some that are warnings, some that are testimonies, some that last a few minutes, some that last 30-plus minutes. And so, again, you'll find all sorts of great resources there. And if people want to contact you, they can do that as well and have you come and speak to their group or something else. So thank you for being in the studio.